You are now tuned in to the Rate Limited podcasts with your host, Ray Fernando, Gosu Coder, aka Adam Larson, and Eric Brobonche, the founder of RepoPrompt. We are here because there's a lot of rate limits going on. If you've been using Claude Code and all these different things, there's so much crazy news and gossip. And if you stay towards the very end, we have some really cool stuff about how to do agentic coding, like agents to agents frameworks, and all these really great deep dive discussions from Adam Larson here. And so without further ado, Eric, go ahead and kick off the show.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ray. So, the first news item this week that I think really deserves to be touched on is that it seems like the Claude Code team accidentally uploaded their source code online, and it didn't take long before the entirety of Twitter just filled it up, grabbed it, and distributed it all over GitHub. So it's all over the place. And now I think the lawyers are coming for all those forks and whatnot. So it's really interesting to see that like a mistake like that could happen. From what it seems, there was just like a process error where a developer accidentally included a source map, and the team has been very gracious and not like throwing that dev under the bus who did it. And I think, we can all relate to mistakes happening in prod. Like, there's processes involved for a reason, and we want to make sure that these things happen, correctly in practice. And, Ray, you worked at Apple for a long time, and you were telling me earlier, these things can happen even at large companies like Apple, even without AI involved. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that's like, making big releases?
Yeah, I think the most important lesson I learned from all these years of things and stuff, it's like, I don't speak directly for the company. It's just kind of my own experience as a software engineer that like, if I'm running a company now and I have employees that are hired, the release process is extremely important, and there's certain things that you want to check. One of my first bugs that I found out actually prevented, a whole bunch of crazy stuff from happening. I assumed it cost the company lots of money, and the best part and the thing that I appreciated from all my managers were that it was like, don't make the same mistake again. So I think that really got me to think as a really junior engineer to be like, okay, I really have to pay attention to all these details. Even if I do delegate to an AI system, what rules are in place? Is there a human involved? Are there like really specific critical steps? And if they're like that important to the business where it can be costly, more eyes and more attention are going to be on it until we have a system that can take over. And I think kind of that's the big thing that I would say is a takeaway, that maybe if you have some business critical thing that is going to impact your business a lot, make sure you have some process around it. And either other folks to check or whatever that's involved, even if it takes time away, all your hard work can just go away overnight in some way. So it's always critical.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge deal to see this source leak. Anthropic's been very secretive with a lot of their stuff. They're not so open, like some of the other competitors. Most of the other harnesses are open in this way. So it's interesting to see it happen, and what's going to come from it. Like I do wonder what's going to happen now. But I think the takeaway seeing from people who are like scrutinizing the source. I don't think there's any magic in that harness. I think, like people are like trying to find, what is the special sauce. I think at the end of the day, it's just the model. The model is used to a certain shape of work with these response structures, message formats, and such. And there's a nice little like set of tools around the UX of it. And I think there's some stuff to be learned around that. Though I would be careful overly scrutinizing the source. It's not public, and to be careful what you read. But yeah, I don't think there's magic in there, and I think we're all just exploring and figuring it out as we go, and I think the labs are doing the same, and so it's interesting to see. So yeah, any thoughts on it, Adam, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was bound to happen at some point in my mind. I worked in the video game industry for 6, 7 years, something like that, and pretty much every video game we released within days was already cracked and source code was out there, and they were like, it's just one of those things that like humans are going to make a mistake, people are going to figure out ways to decompile things. And to your point, Eric, I don't think there's anything that special about any of the harnesses really. I think a lot of it comes down to like how the model interacts with the harness and how they're trained and how they behave. I would say, as a company gets mature, to Ray's point, there are better checks and like gates that products need to go through before releasing. And this just shows me, Anthropic's moving fast. They're breaking things. They're probably still operating quasi and startup mode. And as they're a multi-billion-dollar company now, they're probably gonna have to start putting in some actual like formal release processes and make sure that whatever boxes need to be checked, which I know a lot of people aren't going to like, but it is just the nature of when if you need to protect your IP, you have to do that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people upset right now at Anthropic that their code is out there and being looked at. But like I said, bound to happen. It's just been the nature of the internet in my entire life. The entire time the internet's been around, stuff like that's been happening.
I did read something interesting as well about this is that, I mean, it's JavaScript, right? It's TypeScript. So like even in the binary that's released, it's all like reverse engineerable. It's like minified JS. Like you can recover a lot of that. Like, so it's not like the stuff wasn't kind of available if you knew where to look. I think the difference though, from what I did see is that, what's interesting about this release is that there was a lot of like internal only parts of the code that were previously stripped from the build. But because the source was like fully released now, all that stuff is available to kind of look at. So that's why some people were able to find like, secret model code names of stuff that's upcoming and whatnot, and finding interesting prompts and stuff that are interesting too. Like just interesting things to kind of, dig around. And there's lots of thoughts and people digging around on X if you want to read for it. And I'm sure on YouTube as well.
Okay, one theory. The Tamagotchi game thing that they released in there.
Yeah.
It had to be an April Fool's thing, right? Like that had.
I don't know. It sounds like it was in there and planned for a while. They put a lot of work into it, so
it has to be an April Fool's thing. It's got to be, man.
I think they're just cognizant of a lot of people are just staring at the little thinking spinner, and they're like, well, what are we going to have people do while they're waiting? And instead of scrolling, we want to keep engagement, so let's bring them into the app and start feeding a creature.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Subway Surfers, bro. We just gotta get those Subway Surfers.
Yeah. Just Italian brain rot all over the place, right into your code. All right. I mean, the next topic is, I think, a little bit more relevant to the folks of the pod here is that Anthropic actually really tightened up some rate limits in the last couple of weeks. A lot of people were seeing that their usage limits are blowing up. The official word was that actually they did a lot of efficiency improvements, and it's only 7% of users that would notice like increased rate limits. To be honest, 7%, in my opinion, like is actually quite high, because all the power users are in that 7%. Pretty much everyone on X who's like talking about it are in that 7%. So it's bound to feel like a larger number than it kind of seems on paper. Like if you think about it, like a lot of the people outside of that sphere of like power users, they're probably using it quite casually. So of course they're not going to be hitting those limits. But it seems like there's even something else going on top of this, where limits are being hit faster. Potentially prompt caching is failing in cases, and that's like a quite interesting thing to observe. So I'm curious, have either of you been hitting increased rate limits? I mean, it seems like they're being squeezed because of all the new users coming in, and there's only so much GPU capacity to go around. Ray, have you been hitting them a lot lately?
I haven't really been using Opus like Claude Code in the actual Claude Code harness.
Yeah.
So a lot of my usage has really been from, like external agentic, like the Claude SDK testing type of stuff. So I haven't really seen it there.
Okay.
I have like this agentic framework that's kind of running in my own little thing. And that's basically what I use a lot of my sub for. It's like just testing around that. So my limits look okay. I use, the Claude Cowork and Claude Dispatch, and they seem to be very generous there too. I have the $200 max plan too, so that's pretty good. And I just did taxes. I did a whole bunch of stuff, all kinds of requests. Didn't matter what time of the day I did. I still seem to have a lot of limits.
Well, it seems like the tighter limits are for you, I think 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're doing your work outside of those hours, I think they're pretty okay. And I know that they have like a temporary promo where outside of the peak hours, you're getting double limits. So it's like kind of a whiplash where like if you're using it in peak hours, you're getting basically half limits. And then afterwards, you're getting like a double or normal. So it's kind of hard to gauge like your usage and see like what's fair. I noticed that I moved up to the $100 plan. I'm mainly a Codex user, but I started turning to Claude for certain tasks in the last couple of weeks. Just so I wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit. I was on the Pro $20 a plan, and that one I noticed when the first day when those limits kicked in, I just was using Opus a little bit, and within 25 minutes the limits were gone with 2 chats running. Like you could just see the bar fill up. So that was really terrible. but
Did you
that's
have
switching to a
extended
$100
thinking on
plan.
too, or just
I had it on just medium at some point. I've been pushing it up to high, but like because it's a lot smarter on high. Yeah, it's just tough, like to use it a lot. And I think the OpenAI limits are actually coming back down as well now. With I think April 2nd, where the 2x promo is ending. So we're going to see what they're going to do about that. They just reset rate limits again yesterday, so it's very hard to tell like what you get with Codex as they just keep resetting them. So it's very hard to hit the weekly limits. What I have noticed with Codex though is you're a lot more likely to hit the weekly limit than the 5 hour limit. Whereas with Claude, I almost never hit the weekly limit, but I almost always hit the 5 hour limit. So that's a little unfortunate. And what about you, Adam? Have you been spending any time in Claude Code lately?
Yeah, it's my main. That and Cursor are my main two. I
Mm-hmm.
will say I'm actually. I hate to even say this. I'm kind of thankful they put these limits in place
Mm-hmm.
because there was a time that there's so much outages, it was basically
Yeah.
unusable.
Yeah.
And no one wants these. I don't want these limits. I still hit
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But I also want stability so that
Yeah.
when I open up Claude Code, I'm like, oh crap, go check the Claude status page. Yep, it's down again. I gotta go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was my life for a while. And then I was like, okay, back to Cursor for a bit. I am hopeful that they can stabilize. And if they can stabilize, then maybe they can loosen the reins, if they figure things out. So I'm trying to keep that positive twist on things. But for me, I hit those limits all the time, honestly, especially
Yeah.
because I'm Eastern time zone and I feel like
Yeah.
it's like prime coding times. And
Yeah. Yeah. In the morning Eastern time is the worst time to be coding. It goes through to 2 p.m. Eastern, so that's like really tough if you're trying to get a work done in your workday, normal hours. They really want people to be night coders, I guess, like sleepy damned. It's just how it's gonna go now.
so?
Ray,
How would
you know,
you like if you had like a couple? Like, would you get two pro plans of one specific vendor? Would you get one and one? Like, $400 a
I'd be
month?
one and
Like,
one.
how are you
Like
guys?
to me,
Yeah.
Claude is down so often, at least in my personal opinion, especially during the times that I'm coding.
mhm.
Like it was like literally daily. I'd have something happen. I'd go check the status page, and it's like, oh, they got something going on now, or Opus is down, but Sonnet's okay. Whatever's happening. Uh, I would have to like branch out and have two different providers personally, just because of I want the reliability to actually have something work. Which is why I like Cursor and Claude Code as my two main ones right now.
Cursor and Cloud Code, because you got to have just Opus, like you're not turning into the GPT models.
I turn to GPT models when I have to.
Okay.
I'm still definitely a bigger fan of the Opus models.
Can you talk a little bit about like what that split looks like for you and like why you feel like Opus or just like the cloud models in general are doing better for you?
Do you know how, like, when you work with an engineer on your team and you're like, oh, okay, this person, you don't know them, but they just absolutely crush a project that they're working on. And now you've kind of built up that trust that they're actually going to do a good job with it. What
Mm-hmm.
I've learned with Opus is if you do the planning up front, you could just let it rip. And 90% of the time, it's going to come back with something very solid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say there are times that if you do not spend the proper uptype like planning, it will infer things it shouldn't do and like all the things that would happen, just like a normal engineer. For me, Opus has just kind of built that trust that I when I know I want something to work, I know how to talk to it, I know how to plan with it. If I need something to happen and be done, Opus is what I turn to. Now on the GPT side, I actually like using GPT to review the code that
Mm-hmm.
Opus writes, just as that secondary like perspective. I was using Gemini for a while, but I've kind of merged into that a little bit more on the GPT side. And I don't know, maybe I need to actually just like hard limit myself where I'm only using GPT models for a week just to see
Mm-hmm.
if I can build that trust with them. But right now
So
it's Opus.
yeah, I'm curious though, because you're using it mainly for these long plans in Cursor though, right?
Yes. And Claude
Yes.
Code. Yep.
Okay, so for my experience with Claude Code, the compaction is just not that great. And if you're using the 1 million model token with the context window on Opus, I find like over 200k tokens, it's really hard to trust the model. Um, and I mean the same with GPT. Like I don't trust like large context GPT either. But what I do find is that if I'm executing a large plan and I'm very clear up front and I provide like a key way for the model to kind of recheck where it needs to get the information it needs, um, then the GPT models are better at kind of executing over multiple compactions to kind of solve the full scope of your task. Whereas like Claude, like, you know, you can let it run for a while, but if it's just beyond the scope of where it's going to cross maybe like 300k tokens and you let it go without compacting, it's going to start falling apart. But then if you let it compact too, it'll probably forget some things. I know in Cursor they have a better compaction system than what you get in Claude Code. So I think, you know, that's something to consider as well, like the scope of your plan. I think in general, like you don't want to be doing huge one-shot plans. Like I don't think that's, you know, the best practice at the moment. But I'm curious, like how that colors your experience, and yeah, and I'm curious
Yeah,
as well, Ray. Afterwards, yeah, tell me.
I would agree with you. Like there is a limit to how much you need to push, and I'm
Hmm.
actually still of the mindset that 200k and under is pristine, which is why I
Hmm.
don't use a lot of MCPs. I do not like to pollute my context
Of
anything more
course.
than I have to, so I'm very much on that side. I do agree. Also, the compaction is better in Cursor. I find that it feels very natural, and it doesn't compact so much. You'll actually watch it, and it'll only maybe reduce it like 30 or 40%. So it's
Hmm.
not like a really aggressive compaction, which I think is good. And I also agree that like if you were to try to do something where you're generating a giant PR to go like that is useless. So the plans that I typically are working on try to get isolated to 2 or 3 files or one new feature that's going in. So I'm
Hmm.
not trying to do like an entire like application from beginning to end. Um, but I still go back to I've done some amazing things with Opus, and it has just built that trust with me.
Hmm.
And the way that I actually can build that trust with another model is I actually just need to like go and limit myself to just go use that and figure out how it works. Like pretend Opus doesn't exist for a week. I only can use GPT models and see what I can pull off. Maybe I'll do that this coming week. See what happens.
It's worth trying. I mean, from my experience, GPT-5.4 is great. I think the only thing is like you have to just be a little bit more specific with how you talk to it because it'll take things more literally. But I find that like generally, if you want code that works, GPT is better. The one downside though is if you kind of let it run too autonomously and figure things out on its own, it tends to produce a lot of complexity and it writes a lot of useless tests that you have to kind of pull
Oh
back and
yeah.
clean up after.
It loves
So
to
that's like the
guard
one
things.
downside there.
It loves
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
overly guard things. I'm like, bro, just chill for a second.
Yeah. Well, both the models are allergic to breaking things, so they're both
Oh
add
yeah.
all these backwards compatibility fallbacks. They're always doing that. Um, yeah, it's a lot. You gotta really monitor what these models are doing, or your code base becomes the model's code base very quick. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I wanted to add on the cursor thing that I noticed is because you can reference past conversations in that
Hmm.
compaction things of what they do is that they basically just compact it. They jettison your messages, you know, all of the agent messages into JSON L files, and so it looks like later on, you know, from a compaction standpoint, they just keep some type of context going, and then they're going back in at certain times and reading back in the relevant pieces that they need for their
Hmm.
thing. It's kind of crazy how much it's continued to evolve, and I think the speed is really interesting. It's like wearing different gloves, like you have this glove that will do this thing, and like I used to play baseball, so like pitcher's glove, catcher's glove. There's different things that you use them for, depending on your use cases and teams, and I feel like that um, it goes all over the place. I've been actually I'm signing back up again for the ChatGPT Pro specifically
Mm.
because I'm doing this massive architecture thing where I want to have all my agents talking to each other through like the Apple Watch, even though I don't wear it anymore. I actually got to get
Hmm.
it back out. The Apple Watch has been a great forcing function to build UIs from. Actually, it's like perfect thing for agentic UI thinking because it really is just basic elements. It's just a tap, a touch, and a microphone. And so you can do a lot just with those simple gestures. And like one thing is like if you raise your wrist, you only have like 2 to 3 seconds to do something before your arm gets tired. So if you start to think about UI building in that space, you start to eliminate a lot of things in your UI. And then you start to focus on like, what use case do I want? And so that type of thinking has been really cool because now I'm building a thing that's going to track all my agents, like an OpenClaw, all the things that it spawned out. It's going to track like Codex, what things have it kicked off, Claude, and so forth. And so, I've kind of architected it in a way that I'm going to have like this massive plugin system. So each of them kind of work independently and so forth. But I want to get a good reviewer on it. So I know I was going to spin up repo prompt and then the ChatGPT Pro thing. So I'm going to hit you up, Eric. And
Yeah.
we're going to try to figure this out because I want to like, that's what I want to use the Pro plan for. And I think
Right on.
from what I understand from what you say, right now it's just a bunch of like one, giant couple, like 2 to 3 markdown files that really describe the spec that I'm trying to build and each of these little details for the components. And like, how would I approach this, Eric? Like, how should I, you know, because the file is growing bigger, right? As I add more things,
Yeah,
should I
yeah,
start
yeah.
to separate my files, or like what do you think I should be?
I mean,
I
I
haven't
think you
coded. I
should
haven't
start
put any code.
building.
The only code I have is like a basic HTML prototype that clicks through and shows what I
Yeah.
want. But like, yeah,
I mean, my advice is like, don't over spec up front and like try and like start building, but laying down good foundations so that it's scalable, and like constantly gut check, like read the code or like ask the agents, like, how can we make this more scalable? What can we do in terms of, here's what I want to add eventually? Like, how can we lay down some groundwork so that that's possible? I think setting up projects is actually like a huge challenge with agents because they kind of slop it out. And you have to really be disciplined because, you know, the bones of your project are what kind of determines the architecture going forward and how the project sprawls out and evolves. So my advice is like, try and plan small early on, get the core functionality in, and then like once you have it working, like start adding in the pieces one by one that you need to add, and try and clean up the architecture as you go, so not just like run it off and go. And once you have those clean bones, then you can kind of start running a little further and further. But like you want to make sure that like up front you're taking short sprints so that like you're able to kind of just make sure that your code is growing healthily.
Yeah,
that's
and
great advice. Yeah.
I did Ray, pretty similar. Like get end to end as quickly as possible, and I think that's what you mean, Eric, by bones.
Yeah.
There's too many people I see like not doing that, and then you end up in just a mess. So, like, end to end as quick as possible. Get the framework in place, and then go.
Yeah, because then you might have like described some features and then you didn't really think through how they interact, or you might get like some things that kind of sound like what you wanted but aren't actually correct. And
That's right.
And I'd also invest a lot in finding ways to kind of APIify your code base, so that like models can kind of call into it and test it headlessly without having to run through the whole UI. I think that's like really powerful stuff now, like making a CLI for your app, like finding ways to kind of poke around the functionality and create good test plans. I mean, obviously general unit testing frameworks are great, but like often having the whole machinery running is really helpful, and being able to call into the things that you need is very helpful to test. So yeah, closing the loop is very important, but also getting your hands dirty, playing with it and seeing how it feels. Like the models can't do that well right now. If there's a UI involved, then you need to be able to see how it feels and what looks like, you know, what looks correct and what's missing. So the sooner you can get to that, the better. Yeah.
Sweet.
I was just looking at this Claude Dispatch thing. You know, this just came out, and I know that the two of you have been playing with it a lot. So, you know, Adam, why don't you tell us like what it is and like how it's been affecting your day to day?
Yeah, I had a friend message me and say like, "Hey, I've been using Claude Dispatch. You got to check it out." Because I had heard about it. You know, there's so much AI news, you can't really keep up on it all. And he was telling me what he was doing with it. And I was like, man, that actually sounds pretty cool. So what I've been using it for, well, first let me start with what it is. So within Claude Cowork, or in the Claude desktop app, you can actually go into Cowork and there's a dispatch menu item on the left side. If you click on that, you basically can create an asynchronous task. And that asynchronous task will run to whatever completion, as long as you have the permission set up right. So, for example, I've hooked up like Google Docs to it, and I've hooked up a couple other connectors. So I can actually go through and I say, hey, I want you to do this research. I want you to link where you found it. I want you to build a spreadsheet. I want you to go ahead and put it in Google Drive for me. And then I'll come back in the morning and it'll have the research done for me, everything in a spreadsheet, all the formulas and things set up for me. It's actually like incredibly, incredibly nice. Because it just runs. It runs in the background, and I go to bed, come back in the morning, and it's done. I've actually used it to create projects, too. So I did it to create a few, like, task management-oriented apps that I'm trying to do for this business that my kids are starting up. And it's been super nice. I also, Ray brought this up, but I also did use it for my taxes, too. So I had a bunch of, like, individual receipts and things from credit cards. I had it like bring together like, okay, this receipt matches this. Here's the categorization of things for me. It's incredible, actually. I really like it. Eric, you mentioned this. It is buggy at times. There have been times I've come back and for whatever reason, it failed to create the Google Doc, and I had to like prompt it a little bit around it. But when it works, man, it is so nice.
And how do you
Adam, did you
find it
notice on
like?
the side that it like kicks off this little thing? It seems like its own separate context window to achieve the
Oh
task
yeah,
that you're doing. Okay.
it's got like a little like almost like a project view where you can actually see all the context and the things that it's building up. You can even have files like within its context of it. It's very, very nice.
Yeah, so I'm curious, is it mainly the UI that you're finding, appealing for this work, or is it like, just the experience of using it significantly different versus like Claude Code directly?
For me, I gotta say it's mostly the UI, like, and it's built. So in my day job, I always think about there's agents that you're interacting with to get a job done, and then there's autonomous agents. What this feels like to me is a purpose-built system for autonomous agents, where you give it a single job and it'll run it to completion without constantly asking for feedback along the way. Which sometimes you want the autonomous nature of AI, and I think they've done a good job wrapping that up here.
Yeah,
That's
to
cool.
me, I would typically set up a Claude project and then keep a chat going. But the problem is like I would have to constantly create handoff for all my different chats, even though I had a project folder, right? And then when I would go create a new chat, I would say, "Can you reference the other chat?" And it would, in the last month they started to do that, with the introduction of memories, so that within one project you can reference all of your chats. But with Cowork, it just kind of like that's your project, like that's the whole thing, just in one big ass chat. And then you see it launching off these different, basically it's a sub agent in essence to achieve your task, and it has all the context for it. And so you just keep ripping, and you can still create a new thread or a new whatever, and then you have a new, like basically a different project that you're working on. And that type of workflow is kind of what I actually appreciated about OpenClaw. It's like you could just have this thing that runs forever. You don't have to think about compactions or anything, and it does whatever it does. But to me, this is like less debugging. I know it's going to pick up the things. I don't have to like, I didn't spend any time saying, okay, now go pick up this chat or do this. It was just kind of like, cool, now let's build a spreadsheet. Okay, now if my accountant was looking at this, what type of things would she want to see? And then it just like, and don't clip this, anyone, but basically finance bros are cooked. It's an incredible job. There's a skill for writing Excel files I forgot that Claude had.
It's so good.
And
Yeah, it's good.
it's crazy.
And to add on to that, Ray, like one thing I was trying to do is like for me, the hardest thing is like meal planning. I know this sounds ridiculous, right? Meal planning, getting the grocery list together. So like I was like, okay, plan a meal. Here's the things that I've done in the past. So it did that, build a spreadsheet on it, and I said, go to Walmart.com, add everything to the cart, and it added a bunch until Walmart realized it was a bot operating it, and it blocked it. So it's like, dang it! Like we need websites that are built for agents to interact with.
Walmart CLI.
We do. We need a Walmart CLI.
It's crazy. The grocery list thing is really nice. Like, there's a lot of little tedious things that you end up doing day to day that, like, if you take the time to try and like let these agents automate it, like you can actually get like, a lot of time saved and quality of life gained back. Like, it's very tedious to like pick a recipe, pull out the ingredients, make sure that you get the right amounts and you get everything on that list. Like, that's a lot of stuff that's wasted time, and it's nice to have that kind of automation for it. Especially if you don't have to think about it and your cart's auto-filled. Like, I mean, that's the dream for sure. That's very cool. So, like that, so that's great. You guys are diving into it. Do you find you using it a lot from your phone, like with the tools around that, or like you're just mostly using it on the computer?
Probably 50-50 for me. Yeah, Ray, I'm curious if you're the same.
It's mostly been because it's on the laptop. Even though I have it on the Mac Mini, like all my financial stuff, my Mac Mini is literally just for my little claw guy. I was like, no crazy stuff going on in there.
Yeah,
So
fair enough.
like I kind of have some isolation, but I want to. It's making me think whenever M5 stuff comes out, with this Apple announcements, if they get an M5 Mac Mini, that's gonna be my beast mode machine with like running all this like headless stuff and all this cool things that I want to really just bump it up a whole notch. Yeah, because I like that system a lot.
All right. Well, That's cool. I do worry a little bit about overdoing on the agent side with your phone. I do find like it's like a little bit of a vampire. You know, if you're already over spending too much time on your computer, especially with the coding agents, that you start kind of delegating and managing agents constantly from your phone. Like, you know, it's just quite the suck of energy and attention. It's a bit of a concern that I see going forward. Curious if y'all feel the same about that. Yeah.
I definitely do. Just to
Yeah.
add on to that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, as a family man, you know, you got all that
Yep.
concern going on. Um,
Definitely.
yeah.
I've talked to a
So
lot of
I'll,
people who feel that way too. Yeah, I think it's just. Do you think it's a phase? Like, I'm just curious for
No.
you guys. Like, you no? Okay.
No, I think like more and more.
Oh man, this is
The
bad.
more automation this stuff comes in, the more people are gonna want to do on their phones. Like you see the draw for it. Like I could see the next generation. They're just computerless. They're connecting to cloud agents and they're just doing all their programming from their phones, like never looking up at a bigger screen, just destroying their eyes. It's terrible. I know it's not going to be phone terminals, but it's not going to be like I don't know. It's messaging
Yap
apps.
to app,
You know,
bro.
the
Just
form factor
yap
is
to the
solid
app
on your
store.
phone.
Let's go.
Oh man, yap to the app. Oh jeez.
We all are going to need like
Yeah.
a day where we just like don't use a phone at all. Like I think every person's going to have to get to that point where it's like no
Yeah.
phone day.
Yeah.
Because
Dangerous
I don't
stuff.
know.
Yeah. All right. I wanted to switch gears a little bit. You know, we were talking a little bit before about, you know, what it's like to design agents, you know, not for coding. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit with you, Adam, because I know that's what you've been working on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about like the kind of work you're doing there with these agents and like what kind of stuff you're thinking about when designing these agents for that work?
Yeah. Just if you don't know, like my company that was acquired recently, we were focused on building agents around the marketing space. So I've very fortunately had the opportunity to learn both the hard way from customer feedback that was not great to like actually getting good customer feedback, like what works and what doesn't work from an agent perspective. But let's extrapolate that out because like if you think about the marketing hype around agents today, the promise is that it's going to basically automate everything that we do. Like it, and let's start, if we apply that to any vertical, banking is one that I'm familiar with, marketing is one I'm familiar with, accounting is one I'm familiar with. But then you start thinking about the future of point solutions going away. So that the idea would be is that instead of actually having to buy 10 different applications, you buy one that can basically run your entire business. So like each of us have businesses that we run. You can kind of imagine like an agent that does everything you need to do, from the marketing you need to do, the accounting you need to do, the payroll, the taxes, the operations, the management of tasks. Think about the context switching that has to happen in that world. So I don't want to get into too many specifics, but I'm just kind of like seeding the problem here. Coding agents, it's very like focused. You're working with a very small set of tools, and then what people do is they plug in MCPs to try to expose that, and people optionally bring those in. But if Eric, you're running your business and you need to figure out your marketing plan right after you're talking about like your accounting and finances, right after you ran payroll, and all of this is being run agentically, whether a combination of autonomously or interactive, the problem really becomes all around how you manage the context of things and how you manage what tools and sub-agents are actually available at any given time. So the architecture that I've been building out around this is what we need to do in those types of systems is we're going to have a much more thoughtful process around building what I've been calling a context engine. Now, and this isn't a new thing, but it actually becomes more important as the scope of the things your agent needs to do scales. Because we all know you add 100 tools to an agent, it's gonna be bad. So you can't have 100 tools registered at any given time. So what you need to do is you need to have this intent. You need to have a way to, like, based on what the user is starting a conversation with, what is their intent? How do you take that intent, map it to what skills and what tools and what context need to be actually built together to start that conversation? Then the problem becomes, okay, you've got this really great, ideally really great framework to now be able to do whatever job. So like, Ray, maybe you're doing your taxes. So the context engine's built that. But you get to the end, you're like, okay, now that I've done my taxes, I actually want to go do something completely unrelated. How do you actually switch over to that new that new batch of like context? How do you rebuild that? So I think there's like tooling that actually has to be built to manage these cross intent activities while carrying along enough context to actually be able to to actually transition into that. Because some of the things you might have been doing in that initial conversation may carry into that second one, but the tools, the skills, everything that's needed to do that second job, completely different. And then what you end up with is like that is a very interactive, right? So that you're interacting with the chat, you're talking back and forth. But there's also the idea of proactive agents. And we were talking a little bit about it with dispatch. But and we were talking a little bit about it before the show with like cron jobs that you can actually trigger to go have things run. There's the difference between interactive agents and autonomous agents. So you also need to manage the idea that you have autonomous agents that do something for you. So it basically does all the context engineering and it pulls you in, but you can jump in later and interact with what that autonomous agent did. So that's the model that I've been building out in my head. I'll pause there because I think I threw a lot at you guys.
Yeah. So I'm curious. So you're splitting off, this work in terms of managing the context for spinning off these other agents. And how do you basically decide like what models are going to do what, and basically how are you evaluating the success rate? Because I know a lot of the benchmarks we're kind of relying on when we're looking at these models are very coding oriented. There's some that are basically computer use or tool calling oriented, but like generally that's like a little vague and it's hard to see like what are good success metrics. Like, you're talking about intent inference and all that stuff is super important, especially for more non-technical users trying to manage their business using these things. So like being able to decipher what the user actually wants, that's like a huge part of it too. So how are you thinking about it in those terms, and how are you evaluating the success metrics there?
Yeah, so you're dead on. And some of the stuff that I've talked about is kind of subjective too, like what is good in some of these situations. The key thing is to start with measuring something. So I would say like what we're doing, what we try to do is have some set of golden prompts that we're consistently testing against. Ideally automated in a way that gets the outcome that you're anticipating at some threshold, right? Maybe your threshold 70%, maybe it's 80%. But the main thing is you need to understand when you make a change, how much it's impacting the performance of some set of data. Now, that golden set of prompts should change over time as you get user feedback, because what you thought people were going to do with your system and what you theorize around it may not be what actually happens, which goes back to that thing we were talking about earlier, Ray, which is getting end-to-end is so vital, especially getting it end-to-end where a user can actually use it, even if you're slightly embarrassed by it. Because you can actually start gaining that information where you're like, I thought people were going to ask these three things. That is not at all what they're doing. We actually need to tune the system to be more geared towards these types of things. But it really is a series. It's having that starting set of prompts, even if they change over time, but just so you can measure, so you can make changes without risking things, evaluating the outcome of that, and then iterating on what that golden set of prompts are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually been working on in my own workflow in Repo Prompt a system for exporting a prompt for another model. So like when you're trying to pull GPT Pro, so there's like this layering of like a model calling another model to gather context and then exporting the result of that. And I was getting some user feedback from people who are like, hey, like the end result when I give it to GPT Pro, it's just giving me a prompt. And I could see that like when users were asking the system, they were saying, hey, make me a prompt to do this. That's what they were asking for. And then the model was like, okay, great. I will prompt the tasks to be to make a prompt. But the system was already tasked with making a prompt. So it was just redundant and people were just not asking the right thing. And so like I had to go in and prompt the system to actually extract the intent from the question to then funnel it in the right way to get to the actual outcome, which is to make a plan or execute a code review. And so that's like something that like I wouldn't have thought to think about because I'm just using it and it's working fine for me because I'm asking for a plan because I know what to ask of it. But it's interesting how, people adding these extra layers of redundant prompting are causing issues. So I'm curious if that's something that like you're running into as well when you're thinking about these things.
100 all the time, 100% of the time. Like what's amazing about this space, honestly, is it's so unsolved, and I love it. And a lot of times people are getting paralyzed by like, well, what if it does a bad thing? Like, what if it does something wrong? What if it does something a user doesn't expect? Well, yeah, it's going to do that. Like, that's AI. Like, it's probabilistic software. We have to change the way we are approaching these things into like, let's build a theory on what we think people are going to do. And we shouldn't just make this up. Like, we should base it on real data if we have it. But then we need to iterate and be okay with iterating. Exactly like you said, we have that stuff happen constantly at Rayleigh where I'm like, well, this works great. But then it's like, that's not at all how people were talking to it. And they were
Yeah.
putting things in there that were very different.
Yeah.
And depending on the model, depending
Yeah.
on the AI model, it will interpret it different ways. You also
Yep.
have that layer of it to deal with.
Yeah, and if you have models talking to other models, then that
Yep.
layer of chaining and the prompting leads to areas where like you might actually have compounding misunderstandings that just lead you
Exactly.
really astray. So it's a really challenging thing when you're orchestrating models like this.
So,
Any thoughts,
yeah,
Ray?
how
Or
did
are
you-
Yeah.
No, I'm curious on the architecture and like the problem solving piece of it. I feel like people who are running businesses right now are really curious about the agentic coding. People are thinking, let me just go to OpenClaw because people are talking about that. And all the YouTube videos are showing, how they've transformed their businesses overnight. And, there's like a lot of hype around that. And then there's like the new Hermes model and so forth. And, Eric, you're just basically, and Adam, you're just going right into the code and so forth. If I go to 11 Labs, they have like 11 Labs agents that are pretty nice GUI interfaces that just kind of get me started in thinking about, a basic agent, right? Like they already have the stuff there and it just plug and play. What priorities of things that should people like think about first before maybe, like not only playing with the agents because you just need to learn how they work, but like it sounds like Adam, you've done a lot of thinking about the frameworks for things. And like if you were to distill down maybe to your children and say, hey, we want to run this like cool store, e-commerce store. What part of it can I use as agents? I'm going to try a lot of things, and like, how would you guide them?
Yeah, I would say, let's say you're in a business and your CEO is like, we need to build an agent. There are a couple different things that you should start thinking about immediately. Literally everybody in the world can build an agent. Small agents are incredibly easy to build. No offense to anybody that believes otherwise, but they really are very easy to build. The AI is really good at doing the basic stuff.
Well, can I just say one thing on that? So just so you know, a basic agent, if you want to just get that working, you just download one of the SDKs and you can use AI SDK, which wraps all of them. But like the agents are basically built into the model now. All it is you have a query and you give it a list of tools, and the model will just call the tools. And so you don't have to have there's no loop, there's nothing there. It's just the model will call tools and then it will answer, and that's your agent. So that's the basics of it. It's nothing more than that.
And you're spot on. Like literally there is no moat there. Like it is very simple. So what if you're a business, what sets you apart? What is something that you can do that OpenAI, that Anthropic, that Gemini, that Google or whatever cannot do? And ideally, what that is going to be geared around is context and action. So what is the context that your business has that OpenAI won't have? And if you're a business with a good data foundation, you need to start thinking and theorizing around what are the things that I can do in my agent that actually give better outcomes to my customer that they couldn't get just going to chatgpt.com. Otherwise, people are just going to go to chatgpt.com. And then the action side of it is like, what is it that your company does with whatever the job to be done that is hard to do elsewhere? And how do you make that agentically accessible? So for example, if it's like, hey, if I want to go design an email, I can go to chatgpt.com today, design an email. But what if I wanted to send that to 1,000 people? That is an action ChatGPT can't do. So those are examples of things that I would really anchor to, but do not forget the context, because a lot of people are jumping into building agents and they have no thought process around the data that needs to go in, how you should actually inject that context into the prompts that actually are going in, but also give the agent the ability to ask questions about your data so that it can make good reasoning decisions based on the question to be done.
Yeah, I think another point on that that's really important is how are you designing the tools for kind of retrieving that data in such a way that like it doesn't overwhelm the context window when it returns. Like a lot of people's first mistakes when they say like, oh, let me just have the model query database and it returns like 10 million results. Like that's just an overwhelming amount. Like the model's going to try and get broad results, but like how do you kind of distill down what it needs from that call and try to optimize the calls so that it kind of gets to what it needs faster? And I think a lot of this is a lot of iteration, but it's also like formatting output and being clean about like, restricting what happens. I know Cursor's approach is that they just dump that to a file and let the model kind of read from it. But in my experience, a lot of the time the model will not necessarily go and open that file, or maybe it will in some cases, but then it adds more tool calls to retrieve the data. So finding good ways to kind of massage the data and return it in a way that is clean and efficient, that's like goes a long way. And it's one of the things that I do with my MCP tools.
I actually love that, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I love that too. The one thing I would also add on, this is a theory. I haven't actually implemented
Hmm.
this part yet. Everything else I've talked about, I've definitely worked through. But I honestly believe code gen, we need to start giving agents the ability to start operating. And so, for example, in data analysis, if someone asks something like, hey, I want to understand the propensity of blah blah blah, there's no reason we shouldn't give the agent the ability to actually go do some of that work for us via code. That's my theory currently. Again, I haven't executed on it, but I think figuring out like the sandbox architecture and making sure we can run things safely is going to be the next like pivotal thing to kind of figure out in agent development.
So actually, on that note, what's interesting is I was having a kind of markdown. Like the other day, I was working with an agent to take a markdown file and convert it into a PDF, and I was noticing the agent would go off and just make a throwaway script in a temp folder, and it was just like, hey, I'm just gonna make this temp script to kind of solve your problem. But like I think the temp script part of it is actually the wrong thing to do. It's like, oh well, maybe I'll need to iterate on this script, or maybe I want to keep that script around for next time when I need to do it. And so pushing the model to kind of have reusable scripts is very important. I think that's what like skill files are good for, is like you can kind of guide the model, write the script, store it for later, and just like pushing the model to write this reusable code. Like of course the models need to be able to write code to kind of analyze data. I think it's super important, but like if everything's ephemeral, they'll forget how they did it and they'll have to relearn it every time, and that's just inefficient. So yeah, finding good ways to make things reusable, yeah, very important. Yeah. Anything else on this like work of dealing with multiple agents, especially? Like I know a lot of people are very obsessed with orchestration these days. You know, they want to kind of token max, and I'm curious like what you're thinking on with that.
Okay, I saw you unmute, so I'm going to give you a chance to jump in here before I
Oh,
close out.
well, I think we will save it for the next episode because I got to head on out soon. And I think I'm going to have an interview today with some of the folks who were basically token maxing, and they're from
Okay.
Korea. And these guys are just like crazy next level. And they, even the Jeff Huntley, the inventor of the Ralph Loop, saying that these guys are the token slot masters. So for him to give that
Yeah.
to them, like
Yeah.
it makes his Ralph loops. They use Ralph in their looping type of thing. He's just kind of has bowed, like given them the crown of like, wow, these guys are
Yeah.
thinking about things a little
I
bit differently. And we could talk more about the
yeah.
architecture for the next episode. So stay tuned, folks.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Just a quick thought on that personally. Like, I think like once you have more than one layer of indirection, I think you're kind of overdoing it, in my opinion. Like when you have one agent managing some agents, I think they can manage one layer of agents. Like that's doable, and you can kind of still audit what's happening. But like a second layer, to me, that's too much, and then you're kind of getting way off the rails. And I don't think we're there yet in terms of what you're able to do. But it's also because like you're not able to have oversight over this, and I think we're not quite there at the point where slot maxing is worthwhile. Like I think you're just burning tokens for the sake of it. Don't listen to Jensen, who says that if your 500K a year engineer is not spending a quarter million a year in tokens, that they're falling behind. Like that's just bullshit. Like actually someone did the math on that, and I don't think it's reasonable for anyone to even come close to spending like the amount of tokens you'd need to kind of burn a quarter million of in tokens. It's just such an insane amount.
Well,
I mean, maybe once the next gen
these
models
guys
come,
do
but
not 1 billion tokens per day, 2 billion
yeah, it's too much
just for one guy.
Yeah, and what are they
They
shipping
get,
with that?
they got like, they have like the Oh My codex, and then Oh My
Oh, those the Oh
Claude
My
code.
the Oh My guys. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Oh My
Okay.
guys. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're crazy.
I mean, listen, good for them. I'm happy for them.
Yeah, more
I would,
soon. I'll have more
I
details.
would like
soon,
some
so-
of those billions of dollars if they don't mind.
Yeah. Oh man, I'll take the 250K. You can
Yeah.
you can keep the tokens. Oh jeez. All right. Well, I think that's a kind of good place to kind of wrap up for today then. So I stuff to think about. If you guys all have questions for Adam or myself or Ray on what it is that we're thinking about in terms of multi-agent orchestration, or wanting to dive deeper on building agents outside of coding as well, I think that's like an important thing to start thinking about. Please do drop a comment and let us know. I want to hear from you. Yeah. Any closing thoughts there for today, Adam, on this?
Nope. I appreciate you all. And if you guys have better ideas on how to do any of this stuff, drop in the comments below.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we're
we're all
always open to
learning.
back. Yeah.
Make sure
Absolutely.
to leave those 5-star reviews. We are aiming to be the #1 AI podcast. So if you watched our first episode, Claude Sonnet had claimed to be the #1 AI coder just because they, denounced that themselves. And of course, you can give your own self medals. And so we're asking you for help as well. So 5 stars all across the
Absolutely.
board, whether it's Apple
Please.
Podcasts, Spotify. Make sure you go ahead and do that. It actually helps the rankings. So we're moving up on our little rankings here. And I appreciate all the reviews that have been coming in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. And hope to hear from you. Hope you have a great rest of your week, everyone. Cheers.
Later.
Cheers.